welcome to the pre-launch of the M-Cubed Measurement Maturity Mapper. On my panel today, I have the very lovely Ben Levine, Paul Hender, and Aseem Sood. We're all AMEC board members, business leaders, and we're all experts in evaluation and insight. And we're here to tell you about a project that we've been working on. We're calling M-Cubed. I'm going to provide an overview of why we've done it and what our thinking is behind it. Ben is going to help me out then by taking over and walking through how it works, as in this thing that we've created, what does it mean, and actually, well, how do I use it? Paul will then say, well, okay, you use it and you get these outputs. And then the outputs, well, what do the outputs look like, and what do they help you achieve? And Aseem then comes in, and we've asked him to review what we've done and look at it from his perspective in terms of, okay, so you're saying we could use it, but how can I use it? How can I use it as a tool within my business? And really sort of bring it to life for me anyway, when Aseem sort of latched onto these different things that he automatically thought, okay, that's my opportunity. So it's very much going to be focused on the opportunity. This summit is where you're going to hear about this first. And so those are the run through, but it is a tool to help you, A, benchmark where a measurement program sits on the map. The idea is that this will give you an opportunity to work out how you can develop your existing program, enhance the impact of it. So we talk about impact in terms of how do our communications have an impact, but our evaluation can also have an impact. It impacts how our business operates, how we plan our communications activity, and how that communications activity drives against the strategic objectives of your organization. It's not a model. It's not a framework. It's not a set of principles. We have those. It's a tool that does exactly what I've just said. We're not reinventing the wheel. This is an opportunity to think about where you are on the map and work out what the direction is that you need to go next. We know this. You make better decisions where you're better informed. That's kind of how we sell a lot of services that we sell as agencies to clients. So this is what the tool helps. Helps show clients, okay, this is why we can help you, this is why we're clever, this is why you should work with us. I'm not going to talk too much about this slide, but it's something I always like to bring in. Is that, sorry? Oh, think about data-driven organizations. We're all driven by data. We have monthly sales targets, we have performance targets, we have customer satisfaction targets, employee engagement or retention targets. We're all driven by targets. Data-driven organizations, they can be smarter. And evaluation of comms is part of how organizations get smarter. So a model works off fundamentally two sort of axes, two sort of directions. The first is how effective, it's based on the effectiveness. So how well does the measurement activity that we produce, the evaluation results, how does that drive planning or campaign activity? And it's ultimately about generating good news for your business and good news for the bottom line of your business, or achieving the objectives more effectively for your organization. Measurement can be very basic. There's lots of discussions sometimes about how it all started out in the 1800s or earlier, just counting news clippings. And it stayed that way for about 200 years. But there are more sophisticated evaluation opportunities. How do you get there? So what stage are you at? And we came up for a simple, easy to digest model, which looks like this. This is the basis of the tool. And I've just called it a model. It's not a model. So here's the reporting layer, the planning layer, the impact layer. That's the spectrum in terms of the level at which you're at. And at this point, I stop talking, you'll be pleased to hear. And Ben is going to talk to you a little bit more about how this whole thing works.
Great, thank you, Colin. Right, so as Colin was talking about, the goal of the Maturity Mapper was really to help organizations, agencies, get a sense of where they are within their measurement and evaluation programs, and to provide them with some data information about how they could get better. So as you see here, this is the framework. This is how we visualize the mapper, and just thinking about what are the elements of the mapper that we needed. So we obviously needed that reporting layer, which we think is the foundation for everything we do. And you can see here, we're just thinking about as you move through this journey, moving from the basic, as Colin was saying, for the last 200 years, doing very kind of counting the things you need to do or the things you must be doing. If you're not doing, you're probably not doing evaluation at all the way through to being much more fully integrated. And then on top of that, we wanted to think about the planning layer as well. And when we talk about planning, it's a combination of two things. So it's a planning for your communications activity, so all that formative research that you need to do, goal setting, et cetera, but then also taking the outputs of evaluation, feeding that back into the program, optimizing, and making things better. And then hopefully, what we all want to be doing is keep moving up towards that top right-hand corner there, which is really about the impact. So then how do we take our measurement and evaluation programs of communications, feed that into our business and our organization so we can really start to see how things work together and demonstrate the value that we bring for our organizations. So those are the basic building blocks, which gives us the mapper. And they really are the inputs for the diagnostic tool that we develop, and we're going to talk a bit more about just now, and Paul's going to show you the wonderful outputs that you get from that. So when we're thinking about how this all came together, it was really born, I think Colin alluded to this, it was based in the great work that we at AMEC have already done, right? So we have the Barcelona Principles, which are our guiding code for how we think about and have the right culture of measurement, right, within the organization. We have our integrated evaluation framework, which really helps us operationalize that and be very smart, specific, and prescriptive in how we can do great measurement programs. Really see this as a third jewel, as it were, in that triangulation to bring that all together. So this is a diagnostic tool that gives you two things. It allows you as an organization to get a sense relatively where you sit, perhaps here in terms of the types of illustrative types of reporting metrics and reports that you would create, depending on where you are within this journey at the reporting level, the type of level of planning and integration you'd have in the organization, and hopefully where you sit at the top there and starting to feed into other parts of the business and really being focused on what we all care about, which is outcomes and impact. So it maps you on that and gives you a relative sense of where you sit. But what we've also done is we've collected information, demographical information within the diagnostic to allow organizations to know where they sit within their sector, to let them sit within their market, and even for their, the size of organization and type of organization. So I think that's a really powerful tool, not for you just as perhaps an individual organization, because that's great information to give you a sense of, am I doing well, how can I do better? But then from an agency and consultative point of view, that gives you a real powerful tool to help your clients do better, to push them further along this journey. And that's what this is really all about. You get those two things. So the benchmark of where you sit, but then also tangible advice, recommendations on the back of that that's going to help you move through that journey and moving towards doing better, more outcome-focused, integrated impact measurement and evaluation. So to do that, as I said, we developed a set of diagnostic questions that were focused on those three layers, assessing based on individuals' responses, their level of sophistication within the mapper, from being at the left-hand side of it, perhaps more basic and standard, all the way through to more advanced and integrated. And so, as I mentioned, we've launched a pilot with over 60 organizations, and you're about to see some real data in just a moment, which is really exciting. And as I said, we captured not just the information that helps map you out on that journey and give you a sense of where you sit, but also then giving you the ability to benchmark yourselves within your sector, within your market. So some really powerful stuff, we believe, for AMEC and for all of us. As you start to do this over time, we can really create a nice bank of information that is really going to help our clients, organizations know where they are. So thank you to everyone who took part in the first pilot launch. And now I'm going to hand it over to Paul, who is going to take you and show you what those outputs look like and how it works in action. Paul.
Thank you, Ben. I just want to bring a little personal story to this. So Richard, who's sitting here in front of me, when he first said, I think what we need is some form of idea of maturity, understanding a measurement journey that's going to help support the Barcelona principles, support the integrated evaluation framework. I thought, yes, this is exactly what we need, and Colin volunteered to run the group, and I was like, yes, please can I volunteer for this? Because I have a personal problem in that I, like many of you, go into client meetings and talk to clients about their measurements, and I think in probably more than 50% of those examples, clients say to me, but what does good look like? I'm doing this is my measurement, but is it any good? And then they say, well, tell me about what your other clients are doing. And that's difficult for me because I go, well, I can give you some anecdotal examples, but all client programs are different, and there's client confidentiality. There's a limit to what I can do. So actually having something that can suddenly quantify this and give some tangible empirical evidence and a starting point for a conversation about designing an evaluation program, I think is really important. So in order to do this, we obviously need data, which is, as Ben's alluded to, this is what we've been doing over the past few weeks. So we have developed a questionnaire. We have distributed it across various client networks, and actually a big shout out to Matt Reynolds from Bitrius World, who helped us then get access to the PRCA network as well. So we've reached out, I think, to more than 9,000 individuals. The aim is to get through to end audiences, so people in in-house communications teams and within PR agencies rather than measurement companies and media intelligence companies. Of those 9,000, we got 500 people actually clicking through with interest. We got more than 100, I think it was 110 people going through the questionnaire. We've got 62 completed questionnaires. So a couple of caveats, first of all, for any statisticians and market researchers in the room. I think there's two important points to bear in mind. 62 at this stage is a limited data set. So there's a limit to what we can extrapolate in terms of the information, but there is some useful information here. The second point is this is not going to be a completely representative sample, because by definition, if you ask 9,000 people and then 62 people took the effort to fill in the questionnaire, those people are going to tend to be the ones that are more interested in measurement. So there's going to be a lot of people that are less interested that might have a different point of view. The good news is it's actually given us a pretty good even split between commercial organizations, agencies, and government not-for-profits, different sizes of companies, small companies, medium-sized companies, larger companies, mostly focused, just given the networks that were available to us, to UK and Western Europe. So over time, we'd want to extend this to many more markets to get a bigger steer on that. And obviously, over time, you can see here the split by more granular sectors and different types of organizations. And as we build the data set, we'll be able to go into more detail on those types and do interesting crosstabs, like is there a difference between large organizations, large commercial organizations, small commercial organizations, and so on. But it has given us some useful information, because those 62 questionnaires, I think within the questionnaire itself, there's 11 sections, 66 questions, and based on the answers of those questions, we can then segment the answer to the questions into one of those 3 dimensions of reporting, activity, learning from that activity and feeding into the planning process, but then that might just be done at a communications level, but then can you feed it into how the organization, what's important for the organization, and learn at an organization level. With all of those questions, we can then effectively create a scale from 0 to 100 on how people score. So if you answer all the questions in the most sophisticated way, then you're going to be at this end. If you don't, you're going to be down this end. And the good news is that, well, a couple of observations. One, there's actually quite a reasonable distribution of people. I mean, I think the variance was something like 70 percentage points difference between the far end, the best and the worst. These numbers here are averages. So this is what the average of those 62 organizations said. You'll notice that, well, first observation is that, and this was a bit of a surprise to me, people actually seem more sophisticated than I was expecting, but bear in mind my caveat about the types of organizations that are responding. The reality is it might be further down here, but there's also a discrepancy between measurement using measurement for planning, but then linking it to the rest of the organization. I think anecdotally, from what we talked about for the rest of the conference, that feels about right. And the grey bar at the top is effectively an average of those three dimensions, so you can get an overall score. Okay, so far so good. Just a quick thing in terms of how this splits up into types of organizations, and again, a caveat, given this is a small sample set, there's a limit to what we can say. There's a bit of a difference between agencies and commercial organizations and governments. So agencies overall have answered the questions in a more sophisticated way, particularly on the planning and business impact dimensions. Now, a couple of challenges here. First of all, I think, especially within the agencies, we have got those individuals that are really thinking about measurement, and as many of us know within agencies, you get a huge variation. Secondly, and this was actually very useful feedback, I think there's a bit of confusion in how people interpret the business layer, in that if you're in an agency, is this referring to my own agency, or does it refer to how my clients are then using this information to improve their overall organizations? And in fact, that was some feedback we got, so it's really valuable in terms of refining the questionnaire further in the future. But where this becomes really useful is then you can actually see what's generally working and what isn't working. So here are some overall observations. So on the good news side, people feel that measurement's important, they're doing measurement, that's great. It's not just quantitative, so more than 2/3 are measuring quality as well as quantity. There's an emphasis on audience measurement, so measuring audience engagement, particularly on owned and social channels, and a lot of people using Insight for planning. I want to just pick up on this point, that 2/3 of people saying that use evaluation to track performance relative to the organization's communications goals. And I think there's a difference between organizations' communications goals and then how that then translates into what the company as a whole is doing, the strategic goals of the organization, which I think then links that to that previous point that business impact was slightly lower. And you can see this here, that there's actually quite a lower proportion linking PR performance to reputation and impact on strategic organization objectives. So that's obviously something that as an industry we need to work on. Yes, there's still some ongoing usage of AVEs, but the good news is that's a clear minority, and as came back yesterday in the Business Insight Survey data, that is decreasing over time. Some people say that comms evaluation is not as robust as other parts of the organization, and there does appear to be a challenge in integrated measurement. So we'd say it's important, but in practice it seems to be quite hard to then integrate earned media measurement into the rest of the marketing mix. So some overall findings. But where it's going to become very useful, I think, for you, and particularly for end users, is to then use that data to compare as a benchmark against how you are. Now, here is a sample. This is an individual response from that questionnaire set. So I was, up until this point, going to keep this anonymous. I say was. Good news is I spoke to the lady that filled this out yesterday, and she said, say it, because it actually it fits nicely. It's Jenny Caven from Slimming World, who did the talk yesterday evening. And actually what she said in the talk yesterday correlates really well with the answers that were put into the questionnaire, so I think it's really good. So first point, I guess, to make is that, so the blue dots are Jenny's answers. The grey dots are the industry average. So you're comparing yourself against time. We've got blue against grey. The percentile is kind of useful because that actually shows you what percentage of organizations are better or worse than you. So overall, such Slimming World is better than 72% of organizations in the sample. So that actually gives you a good sense of scale. So, okay, so far so good. Okay, so she feels good about herself. But what's then really useful is then, well, what can I do about that? What am I doing well? More importantly, what can I do better in the future? And this is where it actually really correlates nicely with Jenny's talk yesterday. Because on the plus side, they're doing things like moving beyond, as she mentioned, background doing AVEs. So they've moved beyond that. They're not just measuring quantity, they're measuring quality. They're looking at understanding how to track target audiences, what messages are resonating with those audiences, using market research to understand whether they're building increases in their reputation, tracking engagement on social media, using that to build KPI benchmarks and how to measure themselves going forward. So it's feeding into the planning. And as she mentioned yesterday, the organization itself is very clear about its overall goals and then translating them into different parts of the organization. So the PR performance is then strongly linked into that. So that's all fine, but what are the areas to work on? So I think there's three. First is, well, let me go them in kind of reverse order. So the first is that they do a lot of quantitative audience research, and there's an opportunity to do more qualitative, so using focus groups to really understand how audiences are thinking about Slimming World and and also audiences that don't use Slimming World and how they could then refine their strategy to meet them. The second, which we're now doing, is understanding points of differentiation against competitors. So Slimming World's main competitors, Weight Watchers, to understand strengths and weaknesses from there. And the third point, which I think is probably the most important point of all, and links very nicely with a lot of the rest of the conference, is this challenge of integrating across paid, earned, and owned. And while there is sophistication in the earned media piece, it's then understanding how that works with their paid activity, how that then influences people going to the website, and then as a whole thing. So I think this is actually very useful because it then can inform how she can improve herself over time, even though overall doing well, winning AMEC awards. So I think that's great. There's a final test that we wanted to do here, and that's probably the most sophisticated and hardest to overcome test of all, which is something I think we call the Aseem test. So what we want to do, I think obviously one of the challenges with here is understanding how you can use this in practice and how you would use this when talking to clients. And also to getting a perspective, because a lot of this has come from the UK and Western Europe, is understanding how it would work in other parts of the world. So let me bring in Aseem to talk through your experiences of going through this.
Right. Thank you, Paul. Well, good morning, everyone. Prior to starting my firm, Impact Research in India, I used to work with a management consulting firm you may have heard of, McKinsey & Company. And at McKinsey & Company, there was something that I learned, that if you want to persuade somebody, then you need to come up with 3 reasons. Not 2, not 4, 3 reasons. And this is one of the reasons why this conference is special to me, because we have the 3 I's. This is one of the reasons why I got excited when I learned about this effort, because it's the measurement maturity model, 3Ms. And there were these 3 individuals working on this campaign. And they told me about what this is about, and I got really excited, and I said, I want to contribute to this. And this is where I thought, because they'd already done some work on this model, that I'll test it on how I can apply it to my business, which is impact research and measurement in India. And to continue the tradition, I'm going to tell you 3 stories. Some of you may have heard the first story over drinks, because this came to me as a surprise. One of the lead salesperson in our team, he came to me and he said, Aseem, I'm going to close a very big business. I said, great. He says, I want you to come with me to meet the client. I said, excellent, I'm all for it. More business, more money, I'm happy. He said, but Aseem, please promise me you will not say anything in the meeting. And I'm looking at him and I said, why? What are you saying? He says, every time I get you to meet my clients, you ask them difficult questions. You ask them questions that they don't have answers to. You ask them questions that force them to think, and there are a lot of times they don't even know what their objectives are. And this is a client, he has no idea what he wants, but he's willing to close it, and trust me, we'll help him think through all of those, but let me get the contract signed. And he gave me examples that last time I took you to this meeting, you asked these questions, the guy says,
we'll come back, we'll think about these answers and come back to you. It never happened. I played along. I did this. We closed the contract. After that, we did all of that. And when I saw the questionnaire that was created, I suddenly realized that now I don't have to worry about it because I can actually take the client through a questionnaire wherein the client has to say yes, no, on a scale of 1 to 4, agree, disagree, and in 10 minutes, I have all those inputs which I would otherwise struggle to get. So this was the first thing that really got me excited when I looked at this questionnaire. Second is a category of clients that I have who have the budgets, but every time I approach them with measurement, they don't want to talk about it for some reason or the other. It's very difficult to get into a conversation. And as soon as I saw this measurement maturity mapper, I thought this is going to be a great conversation starter for me because now I will tell them, let's spend 10 minutes. I've not met you for a year. I've not met you for 6 months, but I want to come and meet with you. And you know what? There's a model, a mapper created by AMEC. Let's see how this mapper works. 15 minutes is what you're going to give me, and it's going to give me some interesting results to talk to you about. And what Paul showed us, it also gives us a hint, not only on where we are, but what is the next step that I can easily reach out to and touch. So it tells you, this is the next thing that you may want to touch. Don't try and take a leap and jump 4 steps. This is the next thing that you can touch. And this is the second thing I loved about this mapper. The third is set of clients who do not want to start a conversation unless I tell them how good is their measurement model right now. How do we stand in the industry? What are other people doing? What are your exciting clients doing? What is the big enterprise software company that you work for? What do they do? And I'm always lost for words because of confidentiality, I'm not able to share what I do. And if I start sanitizing, so once I took this approach, I started sanitizing the analysis work to a level wherein they couldn't figure out anything. And it actually turned out that they couldn't figure out anything in what I showed them. So now, when I looked at this mapper, I realized that I have an opportunity wherein I can quickly take those inputs, give them where do they stand, not just in their industry, or in the region, or in all the clients that we work with, and quickly plot them as he showed one of the earlier slides where it was very, very easy. I'm going to quickly jump to that slide. This one. And I will be able to get them to now start allocating budget for the measurement exercises that I'm asking for. So these are the 3 things that got me excited when I looked at the mapper. And I hope that you will also find this useful because I think this is going to help me grow my business. I think it's going to make my life easy. And I will not have to wait for my clients to come back with answers because at times they don't have those answers on their own. So this is what got me excited. Colin, over to you.
Thank you very much. So I think for me, I do like a good bit of theory, and I kind of like to come up with ideas about how things can be done. So I thought, yeah, I can see that. Yeah. I'm chatting to Paul and Ben. We sort of had a couple of 3 or 4 meetings where we just started saying, well, actually, how do we approach this? What line do we take? And it was all about getting to the real practical crux of, yeah, it's this thing. And we've got this integrated evaluation framework. That takes you down a really clear path to get to something that's tangible and helps you say, have I done what I needed to do? But with the really specific recommendations, you can identify, as Aseem's just explained, there's the upsell opportunity for your next conversation with your client. So your salespeople can say, okay, well, I know how to have this, I know how to progress this. Clients get value because actually they think, maybe I should be planning more budget to develop my measurement program because actually I can see that I'm a bit behind the curve versus people in my region or people in my sector. Does that mean that I'm at a competitive disadvantage? And I got really excited because actually this is not just some theory or something that will sit in a dark page of a website that nobody can get any value from. This is things where you can actually quite tangibly see the value straight away. And I'm so grateful to Aseem for helping me out with explaining that in real pragmatic terms outside of Western Europe, because, thank you, Marion, for pointing out, I do know that our diversity and inclusion agenda has not been as well representative in this panel as it might have otherwise been. We did have a raft of people who helped us achieve what we've achieved. From around the world, some of them were also female. And as Paul's clearly shown, we've had a mix of interest and support from people who are both the agency and client side. And I think that, for me, also helps demonstrate the appetite and the excitement that can be generated from this, because it is something that people can tangibly use. So I'm going to ask for questions. I suppose one of the things that I might do is just ask a couple of questions to the panel first, but then please feel free to raise a hand and introduce yourself and say, okay, what about this? I'll start with a question, though, to my lovely panelists, for whom I'm eternally grateful for avoiding me having to stand up for 20-odd minutes and talk here. How do you, what's the way that something like artificial intelligence, machine learning, which perhaps aren't really very well developed at the moment, how do you see that fitting into the model? Bloody hell. Right. Somebody very, very sharp on the video editing needs to go through every single time. Every single one of us has said model at one point through this presentation. It's a mapper. So yeah, so how do we fit the advanced kind of analytics, the new things, on the model? Oh. On the map.
I think we should get a swear jar for you.
I really can't afford it. Some of you in the room know why I really can't afford it right now. But yeah, carry on.
Yeah, I think that's, well, a couple of points to make on that. So I think the first thing is that, and this came up in the artificial intelligence session earlier on, is something that will come up again this afternoon. I think one of the challenges with artificial intelligence is it's being bandied around as a word that can mean so many different things. And I think one of the advantages of the maturity mapper is it almost forces it to come back to a tangible application. So actually, as long as all AI is doing is facilitating a job that is potentially currently being done already, potentially faster, potentially cheaper, potentially covering more content. And therefore, it should actually map against one of the existing applications, the existing points of analysis, points of measurement that is already on there. It's just a technology that facilitates that. And just a sneaky second point, the strengths and opportunities slide was not actually, that is arguably a form of artificial intelligence, because that has come out directly as a result of someone entering the questionnaire, and then it automatically spits out the strengths and weaknesses. Yes, it's not particularly sophisticated in the whole spectrum of artificial intelligence, but it is some application of it.
Can I add to that?
Yeah.
More data will be required to strengthen this mapper, not the model, mapper. And the plan right now is to bring this mapper onto an online platform so that you can start adding your data, sitting with your client or asking him to do it on his own, and you will have an option to say whether my data should get recorded in the mapper or I don't want my data recorded in the mapper. That data, confidentially, without any of us being able to attribute it to you or any client of yours, will be available to the mapper and make it stronger so that this AI...
Well, I'll build on that, actually, because and that's why I put it at this side. So I work as an AMEC liaison with the Institute of Practitioners in Advertising in the UK, and they do obviously a lot of work, if you're aware of them, around effectiveness. So I work in that area, so I liaise with them. And one of the things that they do, which is really interesting, is they build up benchmarking data based on the effectiveness awards that they run every 2 years. And every cycle, there are a couple of guys who pop up with fair regularity, and they do a sort of meta-analysis of the case studies that are entered for those awards. And they look at trends over time, and they produce enormously powerful and interesting data. And I'll give one point for the earned media industry. Combining paid and earned works, and they can show you the data that proves that it's worked over an extended period of time and is still just as effective now. Really powerful data. So it's not just what do you get out of it, but actually we're building a resource then which is going to allow AMEC to provide a data set for meta-analysis over time as we build it, over regions. And actually, potentially, that's how we can target support for regions that maybe need a specific area. And although we have the model, which is very much almost mechanistically generating those recommendations, there's also an opportunity to define that algorithm over time, to introduce different types of modeling that help highlight more effectively, okay, there are 5 things here that you could do. This is the thing that you should be looking at first. So we are still developing the questionnaire. 60-odd questions, too long. But we knew that, and that's one of the reasons why I've thanked twice the people who participated in doing our pilot, and I'm going to thank again at the end, because we needed to get that questionnaire length down, so we need to find out which questions we're discriminating. Marion, I know you want to ask a question, but I'm going to ask somebody else first, because I like to tease. So, questions from the audience, please, anybody? Jesper. And then there's a gentleman at the back. Then you.
Can't hear you.
Yep, I think. Yeah, okay. No, because I'll get told off by Barry. Is there another mic?
It's working.
No, it's on now. Okay. Yeah. Hello, Jesper from Quantum Denmark. First of all, brilliant presentation, and this has me very, very excited. It's brilliant. 2 questions. Do you think in the end development of this tool that would it be possible to build in the feature that I might be able, when I answer the survey or the questions, that I can then go in maybe 12 months later and update it so that it actually it doesn't have the old data? And also, if I want to benchmark my company against other companies, can I then perhaps select only to the ones that have filled in the information maybe 12 months back, so in 2021 I don't benchmark against 2018 data?
I'm going to take this and I'll ask the panel. I think that's what's called a feature request.
Okay,
guys.
Very nice idea. I
Fantastic ideas.
We should evaluate it.
Yeah. Gentleman at the back there. Just behind you. There. Fantastic.
Hi guys. Oh, crikey, that's loud. I'm Giles from Brandwatch. Hi, Colin.
Hi, Giles.
Hi guys. Good work. You can really feel from sitting out here the sense from you guys that you're super proud of this and excited about it. It's coming. I can feel it in the back row. So kudos for doing it. It's a really, I think, coherent and exciting piece of work. I've got just a couple of things. Firstly, you say it's going to be online. Is it kind of open source? Are you going to share the questions and all of the thinking behind it and the results that people are prepared to share? And then second question. Actually, I've got 3 questions. Sorry. The second one is how then would it evolve? Have you got some sort of model? And then who's funding it? It feels like it's something that needs funding or resources. I guess volunteering is great, but it would feel like funding would be a good idea as well.
Okay. With Richard looking at me closely, I'm just going to double check. Was that an offer of funding?
It was a question.
The mapper will be available via the AMEC website, exactly the same way in which the integrated evaluation framework is available on the site. The specific questionnaire and the algorithm that goes into generating the recommendations, we expect that to evolve, which answers your second question as well as your first. So actually, publishing a static version of that probably doesn't make sense, but it is going to be something that is available to all clients and agencies. Richard often refers to the fact that part of the mission for AMEC is to enhance the professionalism and the expertise of our industry, and beyond that, actually, the expertise of people who work in comms. Rising tide lifts all ship. This is part of that thinking. So it's generally publicly available. There isn't a lock on if you have to be an AMEC member or you have to be a certain type of organization. It's going to be generally available, generally applicable. So Richard now has raised his arm since I pointed out these in the audience.
Just to add to that, AMEC is planning to fund it, but AMEC does have limited resource. With the integrated valuation framework, we had donations effectively in time of developer resource from Lewis PR and Giles Petty. I'm not sure if Giles is in the room, but
yep.
Giles at the back
Thanks,
there
Giles.
was instrumental in helping make that happen. And I just remember talking to you, Gilo, last night, and I said, Brandwatch is going so well. I said, how many developers have you got now? And he said, you know, I've got 110. So it has definitely led me to think maybe there is a little bit of development resource sitting at Brandwatch that perhaps we could lean on in the same way that Giles Petty at Lewis helped us with the framework, perhaps. So, you know, we... Yeah.
We need a microphone here.
And on that note, now you're saying audience beware. Now I know who has to beware now. Welcome, Mrs. Marion McDonald. Mrs. Marion McDonald.
I was going to be kind, but you made me wait 3 questions now. No, firstly, thank you. Congratulations on the model. I've built one myself. I know how much work. Yes, that was positive. I know how much work it takes to build one of these. What you called it? People lie.
Yeah.
And people are overly optimistic in answering these questions when they're self-assessing.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if that's something in your testing that you got a chance to do a bit of reality check with some respondents by looking at actual reporting that they do, reports that they submit internally versus what they claim, the stage they claim they are at now. Because my first expectation would be wild over-claiming to seem better than you are. And that leads to then a future development suggestion, which is potentially, you know, and with the right support, funding, and partners, could we, in a version 2 of M-cubed, potentially have AMEC evaluation of how you are? So actually, for members, a paid service where people can send in and submit their processes and reporting, and AMEC can assess and send back, based on the questions, where we feel they are on the model, that they can use as a benchmark, as a proactive sort of suggestion and service opportunity.
So I feel like I need to ask some of my panelists to answer this.
Yeah,
I'll come back with a comment after, but please go for it.
This one hit home for me when I saw the results, because when we looked at it, who seemed to be perhaps moving them to the more optimistic end of the scale, it seemed to be agencies. So speaking on behalf of all agencies, I know we are always overly optimistic, or I think not being overly optimistic, don't want to be perceived as being not ahead of the curve, or at least on par with our competitors. I think there is some of that bias from a human perspective in there, so I think you're absolutely right. We need to evaluate that. I love the suggestion of then either us as counselors and clients, if being able to weigh those responses against what the actual work is, and then even evolving the mapper further to have the ability for us as AMEC to have people submit, oh, this is what I've said, here's what I do. Do the 2 things line up? I think that's fantastic.
Yep.
Yeah, just to pick up on that. So a couple of points. One is that within the questionnaire itself, and this was something when we were developing it, we became very conscious of, if you have quite a generic question, it can be open to interpretation, where you actually talk about specific activity. You have done this in the past X months. You get a more tangible answer. So there are some generic questions, but there are some more tangible ones. I think maybe we could do more to then, and this part of refining it, actually look at the linkage between the two. But I really like the idea of some form of supervisation, so that either you use it as test data that then kind of creates a benchmark that you can balance everything else against, or almost like an additional service where you can then go and, so I really like that approach.
You're right, people do lie. Pablo, was it this morning, was talking? He mentioned that when he was talking about that balance of, well, people say they're going to do, but pay attention to what they actually do.
Created a model a couple of years ago where I sat in test pilot sessions. One client gave themselves a 5 out of 5 on nearly every dimension, and the next client who came in an hour later for the next pilot was 3, 2s, and 3s.
Yeah, so people will rate themselves differently. That's where, and this was completely Paul's genius idea, that's where the percentile piece helps. Because it doesn't matter how high or low you rate yourself, if you're still in the bottom 10 percentile, that gives you a fair indication that there's a lot of people ahead of you. Well, but it's still, but the questions answered honestly will get you your best result for you. So the self-interest to answer honestly. So I work a lot in employee engagement. Part of the documentation, the FAQs, we say, please answer honestly, because if you do, that will enable your organization to better able to address any issues you raise. It's not in your own best interest to lie. But people will, because people overclaim, and going back to Pablo again, his comment about the sale of condoms. But yeah, you have that, but it sort of factors out in the data because you end up establishing normative marks to go against. So obviously lots of people in the audience, I mentioned we're all board members. I'm going to ask somebody who I don't know personally necessarily. Is there any other questions that people would like to ask? We've still got time.
Jonna has a question.
I know. Please, anybody? Thank you, Ong.
On the basis that people lie, I wonder if...
Sorry, say who you are. We met yesterday.
My name's Ong from Maverick in Indonesia. On the basis that people lie, do you think it might be perhaps a better model if actually AMEC members would go and administer the test? So you actually get more reliable ones. You may not get as many as if it's open source, but
I think this is going to be available to everybody. So how you use it, whether you use it, send it to your client, the client fills it in, you fill it on behalf of your client because your client doesn't have time or necessarily as much interest as they ought, or whether or not you set up a workshop where you run through the results, the questionnaire with the clients, you see your results produced automatically straight out the back end, and you say, right, okay, we're now going to have a workshop about this. What do we want to prioritize? What do we want to focus on? Oh, and by the way, there's the budget. But I think that's different opportunities, just discussing it both amongst my colleagues on the panel and other people around about as we've sort of introduced and seeded the idea. They're all ideas that come up. So how you use it, what's right for your market, what's right for your particular type of client or an individual client who's a bit out of the norm. But any other inputs from that?
No, I mean, I think that's absolutely right. It's meant to be for everyone. We want as many organizations to use it and make use of it. And I think how you administer it, either relying on your client or organization to do it on their own or to do it with them, I think it just gives you another tool to use, another way to provide consultative support to your clients. So I think that's a good thing.
Sorry. It definitely is a good idea. Sit with your client, do it jointly.
Yeah.
It'll work better. Yes.
Yeah, so sorry, it could result in different quality of information, absolutely. And it's what's right for your client.
But just on that point, therefore, one thing we could capture is how it has been done, because then at least you can see if there's a difference between those two things, and it helps to, back to Marion's point, you can normalize the rest of the data against that.
Jonna?
Thank you, Colin, so much.
Who are you?
I'm Jonna with Burrell's Loose.
Thank you.
Very difficult question for the panelists. No. In talking about gathering the data, I mean, I love the idea of having the ability to qualify and normalize the data by showing that it was completed with the assistance of an AMEC member or completed solely online, and there's probably very easy ways that we can capture that. So kind of a two-part question. In capturing the data, you talked about having a distribution of 9,000, 500 people click through. Of those 500 people that clicked through, did you lose them once they entered into the survey, or did you lose them just from not even starting that questionnaire? And then, go ahead and answer that one.
That was a brilliant question because it was a wonderful example of watching kind of direct marketing in action. So yeah, you send 9,000 out and you go, okay, what's going to come back from that? 500 then go and click on the link because it's a link. You go and click on the link and it takes you to the survey. A large chunk of them then go, oh, I'm not doing that. Or I might do it at a different time and then
Never
forget to
come
do
back.
it. So 100, so 4/5 of them do that, and then the 100 then start filling out the questionnaire, of which the majority, actually that's the 62, then completed it. So I think that's probably a good sign, is that once you get started, you do then tend to finish
And
it.
that's the point. That's a very good sign of once you get that engagement part. So then you know, even of that 9,000, how many are actively doing it. And then I guess since this was primarily a UK audience, and how was the segmentation of nonprofit and government, especially after hearing Alan yesterday and seeing their new 2.0, I would almost see them as skewing the data artificially high because of all of the efforts and resources that they have in looking at the data. And so, you know, looking at creating, I'm guessing one of the questions was on a budgetary level, so that normalizes it as well. But were you surprised by any of the other data?
So quickly on the government not-for-profit, the majority, I think it was 19 of 22, were actual charities. They weren't government departments. And actually, in a sense, they were quite similar to the corporates, which in a sense is quite surprising if you didn't know charities, but actually, I spent a lot of time with charities, and they're increasingly trying to operate or learn from how businesses operate. So that actually validated my own belief.
Anybody else? Thank you, Jonna. Any other questions? Lisa.
Hi, Barnaby from Cision. Thanks for the presentation. I think it's a really interesting mapper tool, whatever you want to call it. You kind of talked a bit about how organizations can use this to help move themselves through their journey of measurement and evaluation. Have you thought about, and how do you think the results actually impact how AMEC thinks about specific areas that they might want to target information for those organizations?
Well, actually, quick observation on that. It wasn't the direct use case for it, but you could see a real application for that. Because if you think about then aligning that with the Business Insights survey, for those that were up at 7:30 yesterday morning, go through that. So obviously that is a questionnaire about AMEC members and their experience of their clients. I think it's really valuable to then talk directly to end users. So this is a way of getting that information and getting additional information that we could then correlate or link to the Business Insights survey and help us work out what is beneficial for effectively the clients of us, the end users. I think that's very valuable.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes it exciting. I mean, if we hadn't, and this is the pilot launch, thought about that, but obviously we can see the application and just how Paul explained it. More data is just going to help us be more well-informed as an organization and provide better service to our members, provide better service to client organizations, to have better events like these. So I think that there's lots of possibility, and that's what really makes it exciting. And I'm glad that they pointed out how excited we are, because it does give us the opportunity to do a lot with this. So I think the weeks ahead and months ahead are going to be really great.
Anything else? Any other questions? Gentleman at the back there. Any other questions? Sorry.
Hi, we're good to go. Hi, it's Phil from Newton and University of Westminster. Great, I'm thoroughly disappointed. I was expecting a model. It's clear we do not have a model. This is more of an observation, really, which is you've got 4 equal quadrants, the percentiles, but obviously the incremental rate of improvement is not equal. I think many of the gains between basic, standard, and into advanced are quite rapid, but then the rate of improvement gets a lot, the incline gets steeper to climb. And I would say that in that last quadrant, that fully integrated, that's not an incremental gain, that's a transformational gain. And companies there are more than 10% better than companies are way back. It's just an observation on what I would learn if I was there, as opposed to if I was in the next quadrant down.
Yep, I'll let Paul respond, and then I'll come back with a couple of comments as well.
Yeah, so just a point of clarification, those 4 are not equal percentiles. Yeah. So actually a lot of clients are actually concertinaing together in the 2 middle boxes. But yes, I absolutely take that point. And the beauty of this is we can refine the model and we can refine the scoring, even with the same data. So that's great. We can obviously adjust that over time.
I think you're right about going from an organisation that is not particularly well integrated across its evaluation to becoming fully integrated. That's a complete organisational change. It's a culture change for an organisation. There are organisations that do it to one extent or another, or they might do it in a function. But the reality is, with all of the big tech companies are showing us that you have to get data into how you operate as a business. That's why we keep on talking about AI and different AI functions in everything from HR and finance through to logistics and manufacturing operations. That's all coming, and whether it be the narrow AI or the general AI, they're using it in narrow AI basis. This is a tool to help you progress on your journey. We don't expect every organization will see it as appropriate to be as integrated as we're saying is the ideal end goal that you should be looking for. On the other hand, getting nearer that will mean that you're more effective in terms of your evaluation, and you're more effectively putting your evaluation into how your organization succeeds. I've got a really, really tough question now. 3 minutes, enough time for one more question, or get to lunch early and beat the rest of the next group.
Hi, great work, guys. It's not a question, it is a question. It's a question to you, Colin. Could you just please summarize the next steps for us?
Thank you. We've now got the results from the pilot. We're looking at the questionnaire to refine that, focus it down, make it shorter, more punchy. As John mentioned, let's try and make sure we get more people completing the questionnaire, feeling comfortable with it. Building the data set so we can look at more categorizations based on where people are based regionally, size of organization, types of organization. Actually develop the tool, thank you, Giles. And then all that information, that meta-information, that meta-analysis, Paul's shown an initial slice from our pilot, develop that. And all the supporting collateral, such as if you compare with the integrated evaluation framework, you have the taxonomy, you have all those resources of related material, reading. And the next step is to share and tell people that this is coming, get people excited about it. Thank you, Giles, for commenting how excited we are. We talk about it, this is really exciting. Richard even gets excited. Hard to believe. But we get really excited about this because we see so many opportunities, and I've already got 3 or 4 ideas from the questions that have come from you guys that make me think, actually, there's something else we can think about. And as soon as we can share those examples of how this can be used, we'll have more fun with it.
And since we all love metrics, one metric I would like to share to show the level of excitement that we had in the team. We were the only team here who had the courage to approach Barry yesterday and say, we want to add more slides.
Yeah, that was a bit nerve-wracking. Very quickly. Sorry, Mike, just quickly to this lady here.
Thank you. Natalia Vacaretza from UNICEF. First of all, thank you so much, and I'm going to keep this short. I just feel like this is, coming from a client perspective, I think it's very, very useful. I like what you've done. I think this can be tremendously useful as a diagnostic tool to understand where you are. And so my question / kind of final comment is to think of how you could use this to really enhance learning. So for each of these, maybe you think you mentioned 60 questions. If I'm going through and doing the diagnostic and thinking, okay, this is an area that I want to learn, I want to see examples, I want to understand that I am interpreting even the question correctly and have the same kind of standard definition. What you're doing there to support the learning element, you know, maybe not from an agency's perspective where you would be guiding a client from it, but from a client who maybe wants to kind of understand, you know, how can I enhance my own learning on my own, or what are the resources, what are the case studies, etc.
I mean, check out the AMEC website and the Integrated Evaluation Framework. There are a lot of very, very good resources there, including the taxonomy, but including reference materials. We will be building that to sit alongside it. Some of it we don't need to build independently because it's there for the Integrated Evaluation Framework. Within the specific areas in the questionnaire, I think that's the opportunity, if you're working with an agency, to help you complete that questionnaire, for your agency to come along and say, well, okay, well, let me give you some information about how that works and what that question is asking, what that technique or what that process of evaluation is. So guys, I'm going to wrap it up here because we are at time. And I just want to finish by saying thank you to my amazing panel. You've been fantastic and your support has been really, really appreciated. I've got lots of people here to thank as well. Matt Reynolds and PRCA, thank you very much for helping to support us with getting the pilot questionnaires. Professor Jim, distinguished Professor Jim, amazing feedback, really strong help. Richard for encouragement and support throughout. Our very, very dear and good friend Barry. And Ali from everybody really in this room. Thank you. As I say, you've given us new inspiration and ideas as well. Let's go eat. Thank you very much.